How are you guys doing? Today is Monday, May 2nd, 2022. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an elite individual profile on Tremaine Edmunds. The elite linebacker for the Buffalo Bills turns 24 today, and what I'm going to do with this profile is shed some light, shed some attention to what he's been doing ever since he hit the main stage, before he got to the Bills, when he was in college playing for Virginia Tech. I, of course, want to walk you through his career and show you how he's been able to impact the game of football on a micro level, game in, game out for his season. And, of course, going to take it back and look at how he's been able to impact the game on a macro level when we're talking about playing in a sport with thousands of other people competing for his one job. I do think that is very tough to even maintain an air of consistency, to be a captain for as long as he's been a captain. He was a captain on the team when he was about 21, 22 years old, and he's been a beacon of consistency, and he's been one of the reasons why the Buffalo Bills have been a consistent team in the playoffs. You haven't seen him before. He's about 6'5", 250. I would say that, he has as much dog in him as like every other linebacker, but I do think the edge for Tremaine Edmunds is that he's very smart and he's very fearless. I think the fact that he's just so young and he throws himself at every situation, even if he might be wrong in certain possibilities, I think that he has the spatial awareness. He has the trust of his team to know to at least get his back if he were to completely go all for it. I think Tremaine Edmunds is a great defensive leader, and I think that on the opposite side of Josh Allen, I think that Tremaine Edmunds can be a big part of the reason that the Bills could win the Super Bowl this year if they're not super contenders this year. So I digress. Tremaine Edmunds, originally from Danville, Virginia, would go on to play high school football there. He would go on to commit to play at Virginia Tech, so he wouldn't actually have to leave the state. He would go on to play 3 seasons at Virginia Tech, and this was in 2015, 16, and 17. His very first season there was Frank Beamer's last year. And, of course, his very first season in college would be his age 17 season, as he would go on to play 6 games in a season in which the Virginia Tech Hokies would go 7-6. They wouldn't finish ranked, but they would go all the way to the Independence Bowl, where they would put up 50 and beat the Tulsa Golden Hurricanes in it. In that season, in the 6 games he played, Edmunds would finish with about 11 tackles, as he was, of course, fighting for playing time. It's very tough for a lot of freshmen to, jump up into that role and even do it. But he was able to add a couple of tackles for loss as a freshman, and this was before he turned 18. His age 18 season was his sophomore season with Virginia Tech. In that season, he would go on to play 13 games in a season where Virginia Tech would go 10-4 in Justin Fuente's first season there. They would finish as a top-ranked team. They would finish as the 16th ranked team in the nation, the highest rank that Fuente has had since he had been there. They went on to the Belk Bowl, where they were able to beat Arkansas 35-24. In Tremaine Edmunds' second season, he will go on to be named to the second team All-ACC. He would go on to finish with 94 tackles, as he was named a starter for the very first time. He had 16.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. He will go on to register a fumble recovery, and he also will go on to finish with an interception as well, as he was able to force turnovers and really cause a lot of mayhem in the backfield. And this was as an 18-year-old sophomore. But following that season, that was Virginia Tech finished ranked. He would come back for his junior season, and in his last season at Virginia Tech, he would play 13 games in a season where Virginia Tech would go 9-4. They would go on to finish the season ranked, as they ended up losing in the Camping World Bowl to Oklahoma State. In his junior season, Tremaine Edmunds would be named to the first team All-ACC. He would go on to finish with 108 tackles, 14 more than he had the previous season. He would go on to finish with 14 tackles for loss, 2.5 less tackles for loss than the year before. He would finish with 5.5 sacks, 1 more sack than his sophomore year. He would go on to finish with 3 forced fumbles, as all 3 of the fumbles he forced in college were in his junior year. And following those 3 years, and what will be a very impressive draft combine, he will be taken with the 16th overall pick in the 2018 NFL Draft, among names like Saquon Barkley, Bradley Chubb, Quentin Nelson, Josh Allen for the Buffalo Bills. Josh Allen was the first overall pick by the Buffalo Bills in that round, so they actually had a pretty insane draft. Tremaine Edmunds would be the third linebacker taken off the board because they count Bradley Chubb as a linebacker as he was taken out of NC State by the Broncos. Roquan Smith was the 8th overall pick taken out of Georgia by the Chicago Bears. But Tremaine Edmunds would get drafted by the Bills, and as soon as he was drafted by the Bills, just like Josh Allen, he was pretty much thrown into the fire from day one. His very first season at Buffalo would be his rookie season, and in his age 20 season, he would start all 15 of the games he played in a season where the Buffalo Bills would finish with a 6-10 record under Sean McDermott. This is, of course, just his second season there. And then following that season, or I guess within that season itself, Tremaine Edmunds would go on to finish with 121 tackles, the most tackles he's ever put together in a season, by the way. 5 of them were tackles for loss. He would go on to finish with 2 sacks on the year, which is tied for his career high. He would force 2 fumbles and even defend a career high 12 passes. He even had 2 interceptions. This is his very first season in the league, and he was putting up numbers that would probably put all of his other numbers to shame. But people weren't really aware of who he was. He wasn't necessarily named a Pro Bowler, but from then on out, people started to recognize that he was already an instant impact contributor. And this was in his age 20 season in Buffalo, even though the season would end early. Following his very first rookie season, Tremaine Edmunds was named the captain. He was named a team captain at the beginning of his second year. That's a very tough feat to replicate in any sport really at any time, but I think it does give some insight into how dynamic of a player and a leader he is. His second season at Buffalo would go on to see him start all 16 games in a season where the Buffaloes would make the playoffs, in the second season in a 3-year stretch for Sean McDermott. The first time they had made the playoffs with Josh Allen as their quarterback. In 2019, Tremaine Edmunds would finish with 115 tackles. He finished with 100 tackles for the second year in a row. He had 10 tackles for loss, which doubled what he did the last year. He finished with 1.5 sacks. He finished with his lone safety of his career and 9 passes defended, leading to 1 interception. In 2019, while being a starter for the first time and helping the Bills to the playoffs, he would go on to be named a Pro Bowler for the very first time in his NFL career. And then once the Bills would go on to make the playoffs that year, they would end up losing in overtime to the Texans. Following that season, it would lead to Tremaine Edmunds' third season with the team and his second season as captain. He would start all 15 of the games he played in a season where the Bills would finish with a 13-3 record. They would win the AFC East for the first time since the 90s when Bryce Paup was the Defensive Player of the Year, just to give you a sense of how long that was ago. This was also when Brian Daboll was named the Assistant Coach of the Year. In that 2020 season, Tremaine Edmunds would go on to finish with 119 tackles, third season in a row with over 100 tackles as a starting linebacker. He had 4 tackles for loss. He would hit a career-high 2 sacks yet again, and he would go on to be named a Pro Bowler for the second time in his career in just his second season as a starter. Once the Bills made the playoffs, they would end up beating the Colts in the wild card round by a field goal. They would end up beating the Ravens by 2 touchdowns in the divisional round, and then they would end up losing by 2 touchdowns in the AFC Championship to Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. But this will, of course, be the season where the Chiefs would go on to the Super Bowl just to lose to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Tampa. But that would be how that season came to an end. This would lead to his most recent season that he's played, his 4th season with the Buffalo Bills, his age 23 season. He went on to start 15 of the 17 games that the Buffalo Bills played in the first season that the NFL went 17. The Bills will go on to finish 11-6, winning the AFC East for the second time in a row for the first time since the early 90s. Tremaine Edmunds would go on to finish with 108 tackles on the season, 4th year in a row with over 100 tackles as he had 7 tackles for loss. He would finish with 4 passes defended as he finished with an interception. He was not named a Pro Bowler this most recent season, but he was able to help the Buffalo Bills into the playoffs, make it just as far, or just make it almost as far. But this time, their season would end in heartbreak as they ended up beating the Patriots by 30 in the wild card round, just to lose to the Chiefs on overtime when the Buffalo Bills didn't really get a chance, as the Chiefs did drive the field. They did drive down the field on the Buffalo Bills defense led by Tremaine Edmunds, and the Chiefs would go on to the next round. They were going to lose to the Bengals in the AFC Championship, as the Bengals ended up losing in Super Bowl 56 to the LA Rams in SoFi Stadium. But that leads us to where we are now, as Tremaine Edmunds is 24. He has so much of his career ahead of him. But I do think that, with that said, I do think it paints a pretty solid picture of who Tremaine Edmunds is now, why he's a captain of the Bills at so young, and why they're going to continue trusting him, and why he could very well be a player that ends up with the gold jacket at the end of this if he plays his cards right. And between this year and next year, I wouldn't be surprised if Tremaine Edmunds would go on and win the Super Bowl with the Buffalo Bills. With that said, I do want to thank everyone for listening to all 10, 11 minutes of this piece. I do hope all is well. I want to wish Tremaine Edmunds a happy 24th birthday. I want to thank the college football and pro football reference websites and the ESPN websites for giving me all the facts and figures. I would not be able to do this without them. Once all of today's exhibitions and matchups are done, I'm going to come back tomorrow on Tuesday, May 3rd for another episode. So until then, thanks for listening to this piece. I hope all is well, and peace out. I'll catch you tomorrow.